Happened with those presidential tweets this morning. Again, here's Chief White House correspondent John Roberts.
It was an oops moment that sent White House staff and Republicans in Congress reeling this morning. After watching a segment on Fox and Friends, President Trump issued a tweet highly critical of the FISA Act, so-called 702 authority. The president tweeting, quote, "House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of the discredited and phony dossier to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others." The tweet stood in sharp contradiction to a policy statement the press secretary had issued just the night before, throwing the full weight of the White House behind the 702 law. Democrats took full advantage of what they saw as a policy vacuum, saying, "Let's put the bill on hold."
In light of the irresponsible and inherently contradictory messages coming out of the White House today, I would recommend that we withdraw consideration of the bill today to give us more time to address the privacy questions that have been raised, as well as to get a clear statement from the administration about their position on the bill.
Nearly 2 hours after his initial tweet, President Trump moved to clarify his position, tweeting that today's vote is about foreign surveillance of foreign bad guys on foreign land. We need it. Get smart. The president's National Security Council, led by Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, had spent weeks selling Congress and the press on the need to reauthorize the 702 section of FISA. The heads of the intelligence agencies also insisted it was a necessary tool to protect the homeland from terrorists. This morning, Republican rank and file were left wondering where the president really stood. The White House Chief of Staff and Legislative Director raced up to Capitol Hill. Paul Ryan spoke to the president for 30 minutes on the phone after the first tweet. And House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes read aloud the president's clarifying tweet to reassure members the president was still on board. Yet the press secretary today said there was no contradiction in what the president wrote and poo-pooed the notion White House staff had to clean up the mess on aisle 702.
Yeah, it wasn't confusing to me. I'm sorry if it was for you.
Can you tell us why his first tweet sparked off a flurry of activity and phone calls between the White House and Capitol Hill?
I'm not sure about the flurry of activity. Again, to us, that's a pretty normal day, and we're always engaged with members on the Hill, members of our staff, so that seems pretty standard practice.
In his second tweet that he released this morning, President Trump also pointed out that he, quote, personally directed the fix to the unmasking process in FISA surveillance. You'll remember the Obama administration asked for the unmasking of several Trump campaign officials in connection with the Russia investigation. Today, the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, unveiled new restrictions on when government officials can be told who the American citizens are who were picked up in overseas intelligence surveillance. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. Another busy day at the White House. John,
always.
Thanks. The IRS is rolling out new income tax withholding tables. It's part of the transition to the new tax law passed late last year. Individual taxpayers are not required to do anything right now. Employers must begin using the new rates no later than February 15th. The Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, said today that 90% of American workers will see increases in their paychecks as a result of the changes. Another huge day on Wall Street today with record highs across the board. The Dow jumped 206 today. The S&P 500 gained 19. The Nasdaq surged 58, all record closes again. Canada's foreign minister says President Trump's threat to leave NAFTA should be taken seriously. The White House said yesterday there has been no change in the president's position on the trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, which he has criticized in the past. Negotiations on updating NAFTA continue later this month. Federal agents say this week's raids at 7-Eleven stores looking for illegal immigrants are just the start of a new crackdown. Senior correspondent Adam Housley tells us what's happening and why from Los Angeles tonight.
The biggest immigration raid of the Trump presidency targeted 7-Eleven stores around the country, the result of a nearly 5-year operation that had agents storming locations in 17 states and the District of Columbia. Thomas Homan, acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, said, "This is just the beginning."
I've made no secret since the beginning of the year that we're going to increase worksite enforcement across the country to remove yet another magnet, reason for people to come to this country illegally. So no one should be surprised.
Holman stresses this isn't just about illegal workers benefiting. It's about protecting American jobs by eliminating unfair advantages gained by companies that hire illegal immigrants.
If we don't address the causes of illegal immigration, if we don't give the men and women on the ground the tools to close these loopholes and to pass some legislation we need to enforce immigration law in the interior of the United States, you're going to have DACA again in 10 years.
The federal raid comes as Congress continues to debate immigration policies such as the DACA program and the border wall. 7-Eleven noted its stores are independently owned franchises who are required to comply with immigration laws, adding, quote, 7-Eleven takes compliance with immigration laws seriously and has terminated the franchise agreements of franchisees convicted of violating these laws. This renewed enforcement will be a challenge for businesses going forward.
There's a new calculation they're going to have to go through, and that is how do we stay in business? What's the risk reward of having workers that we know or suspect are here illegally?
ICE says the raids are considered audits, and employers and managers have 3 days to verify the immigration status of their employees. And Wednesday's raids send a strong message that ICE will enforce the law, and anyone violating it will be held accountable. Brett.
Adam, thank you. The question of how to reintegrate nonviolent criminals into society and keep them from returning to prison was the focus of a White House conference today. Correspondent Kevin Cork tonight on the politics and policy of prison reform.
2/3 of the 650,000 people released from prison each year are arrested again within 3 years.
For President Trump, it was a chance to work on an issue with bipartisan appeal.
We can help break this vicious cycle through job training, very important, job training, mentoring, and drug addiction treatment.
Today's White House Criminal Justice Reform Roundtable, part of an initiative that was spearheaded by the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, whose father served 14 months in prison for tax evasion, among other offenses. The gathering, designed to build upon bipartisan and faith-based efforts to reshape the way the country prepares ex-convicts for life on the outside.
We need to do more than simply remove people from society.
Kentucky's Governor Matt Bevin says the need for reform is acute.
The workforce in America demands this, is begging for this. There are millions of jobs that need to be filled.
While the U.S. federal prison population has decreased by almost 100,000 inmates since 2009, there's still nearly 1.5 million nationwide. Worse, the number of women behind bars is up over 4,000 since 2012, 1 in 4 of whom are pregnant or single parents when they enter the system.
You see what is happening to so many women in this country and single mothers who are trying to raise their family, most of whom are nonviolent offenders.
America is going to arrest more than 11 million people this year. That's about 21 people a minute. We invest more than $80 billion in this criminal justice just for incarceration.
But the ACLU says any real reform has to include a closer examination of the institutions that are responsible for what it calls America's mass incarceration problem. Imprisonment still continues to be the government's first response to problems associated with issues of drug addiction, mental health needs, and poverty. About 95% of federal inmates at some point will get out. In fact, we're told more than 600,000 of them will be released at some point this year. Brett?
Kevin Cork in the White House briefing room. Kevin, thanks. Some prisoners at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba are challenging what they say is the Trump administration's policy of not releasing any detainees from there. The 11 terror suspects have filed paperwork in a Washington federal court. They note that there have been no releases since the president took office, after nearly 750 releases by Presidents Obama and George W. Bush. Also today, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein released a statement saying that this administration should be the one to close Gitmo. Searchers digging through tons of mud and debris, holding out hope for survivors. We'll go live to California for an update on the deadly mudslides there. That's next. Hundreds of rescue workers are slogging through knee-deep mud as they look for survivors and bodies from devastating mudslides in Southern California. The death toll tonight stands at 17. 8 others are missing. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is in Montecito, California again tonight.
At 3:30, it sounded like a freight train was driving. I came to investigate. I found a man in the street.
Robert LaRoche's neighbor needed help evacuating when the mudslide hit.
His father, his uncle, and his aunt out of houses that were sliding off of foundations and knee-deep in mud. It was scary.
Houses cut in half, trees uprooted, cars tossed like toys. This is just one of 6 areas in Montecito changed forever.
This is a neighborhood that no longer exists. The mudslide literally wiped a dozen homes right off the map. Their foundations are now covered in mud.
3 days into this disaster, the fire chief says search and rescue crews are running out of time.
Several factors that go into determining how long a victim will be viable.
Crews are busy restoring power, cleaning streets, hauling dirt, but there'll be no water for up to a month. Residents near areas that burned in last month's wildfires were under mandatory evacuation orders. Those further away were not.
Some people that initially asked to be evacuated elected to stay. And so, of course, they were left in place, but those that wanted to be moved out were moved out.
The county sent 200,000 emails warning of a possible mudslide and knocked on 7,000 doors in the mandatory evacuation zone the night before. But today it's being criticized by some for not using the emergency cell phone alert system until after the mudslide started.
They didn't tell us that something bad was going to happen like they knew. There's something there.
I don't think people didn't listen. I think people listened. I don't think it's people's fault. I don't think I think this is a natural disaster of biblical proportions.
You know, it may not look like it, but Montecito is the most exclusive neighborhood in one of California's wealthiest areas. Will people rebuild? The land is too valuable not to, but it could be weeks before many residents return. Brett?
William, thank you. The big question in Kansas tonight is who's the boss? The state's duly elected governor says he still is. But for how long? Correspondent Alicia Acuna explains this issue tonight from Topeka.
As Kansas Republican Governor Sam Brownback took the podium for the State of the State address, one question swirled over the executive office. Does the state of Kansas have 2 governors?
No, the state of Kansas has 1 governor. Governor Brownback is in charge, and he makes the final decision.
Lieutenant Governor Jeff Collier is waiting in the wings while his boss awaits word on President Trump's nominating him to Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Expecting a quick confirmation by the GOP-dominated U.S. Senate, Brownback began handing over duties to Collier. That was 6 months ago.
I just teach about politics. But one thing I do teach is you don't count on the U.S. Senate to do anything until it's done, especially confirmations.
The Senate ended the year without a vote on Brownback or dozens of other Trump nominations. And now there is confusion in Kansas.
Lieutenant Governor Jeff Collier, he was making appointments, he was doing major events, and then, Governor Brownback was doing like a Christmas tree lighting or a Hanukkah event. And the question was, who's really in charge?
It's reminiscent of that old Abbott and Costello routine where they talk about who's on first and what's on second.
With the new year, President Trump had to re-nominate his appointees who did not receive confirmation in 2017. Brownback tweeting, "Thank you at POTUS. I will continue to serve as governor until confirmed." Of 626 key administration positions requiring it, only 241 nominations have been confirmed by the full U.S. Senate. While he waits on Washington, Brownback appears to be retaking the reins in Kansas. The question remains, for how long?
Could he be gone in February? Could he be gone in June? Could it be even later than that? Who knows?
A spokeswoman for Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker tells Fox News the renominations will be considered in a timely fashion and they will not require another hearing, but they will require another committee vote before once again heading to the full Senate. Brett?
Alicia Acuna in Topeka. Alicia, thanks. The youngest survivor from last year's church shooting in Texas has been released from the hospital. 5-year-old Ryland Ward got a hero send-off riding on the passenger side of a fire truck back to his home in Sutherland Springs. Ward was shot several times in that massacre that left 26 people dead, including Ryland's stepmother and 2 sisters. Up next, should people who receive Medicaid benefits have to work for them? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 16 in Little Rock, Arkansas, as Walmart boosts pay and hands out bonuses to its workers. New hires will start at $11 an hour. Current employees will receive bonuses between $200 and $1,000. Walmart says the new tax law is the reason for the change. However, the company also closed dozens of Sam's Club stores nationwide today without advance notice. Fox 59 in Indianapolis says Carrier announces a new round of layoffs a little more than a year after President Trump touted a deal that saved some of the plant's jobs. The company says 215 people are being let go, leaving about 1,100 workers at that plant. That's down from some 1,600 factory and office jobs when Carrier announced plans in early 2016 to move production to Mexico. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate Fox 5. The big story there tonight, an investigation into last week's massive problems at JFK Airport. It started last Thursday when a winter storm hit. Sunday, a water pipe broke and forced the suspension of international arrivals. Former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood will run that investigation. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Should able-bodied people who receive Medicaid benefits from taxpayers be required to work for those benefits? The Trump administration says yes. Many lawmakers and others disagree. Here's correspondent Doug McElway.
In a letter to state Medicaid directors today, the Trump administration announced plans to test a work requirement for healthy Medicaid beneficiaries. To some, it harkens back to welfare reform of the 1990s.
I think it's a recognition that, after all, Medicaid is, in effect, a welfare program, and it really should be treated in many ways the same as other types of welfare.
Critics say it is a move that comes dangerously close to touching one of the third rails of American politics.
Trump and his colleagues in Congress spent 2017 trying to destroy Medicaid as we know it. That was part of their efforts to take away health insurance from tens of millions of Americans. They found that in the process that Medicaid is incredibly popular.
The plan would exempt most Medicaid beneficiaries from work, including the elderly, the disabled, the opioid addicted, the pregnant, those who are seeking work, volunteering, or providing some community service.
Conservatives are going to be disappointed by how little money it saves, and liberals are going to find out that it's not nearly the disaster they're talking about.
10 states have already filed applications with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to add a work requirement. Because states bear anywhere from 20 to 50% of Medicaid costs, they see financial danger ahead with aging populations, infirmities, and the resultant higher costs.
Medicaid is already beginning to squeeze out other priorities such as education or transportation and infrastructure. Something has got to be done to deal with the Medicaid problem.
CMS cites studies that show a link between good health, work, and community engagement. Progressives say don't believe Trump's motives.
He's dressing up in all kinds of puppies and rainbows language about helping people work. The reality is what he's proposing to do is to take away health insurance from people who can't find work or can't get enough hours at their job.
That same argument was made during the 1996 welfare reform debate. But 9 years after that law was passed, caseloads dropped by 60%. Opponents attributed that to a growing economy. Brett?
Doug, thank you. Just days after North and South Korea held their first face-to-face talks in 2 years, the U.S. Air Force is deploying stealth bombers to the Pacific. It comes at a time when the Pentagon is conducting a review of its nuclear forces, expected to be released early next month. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin fills us in from the Pentagon.
In a show of force, the Pentagon deployed 3 nuclear-capable B-2 stealth bombers along with 200 airmen to Guam overnight, closer to the Korean peninsula. Defense officials said the deployment had been scheduled for months.
I think when we move bombers across the globe, we send a signal to everyone.
The B-2 is just one component of the nuclear triad slated for upgrade. The U.S. nuclear arsenal has not been modernized in decades. Its missiles date back to the 1970s. This week, details of the Pentagon's long-awaited nuclear posture review leaked to the public and revealed the Trump administration wants more flexibility to respond with nuclear weapons to an attack. The U.S. wants to develop a new low-yield tactical version of the Trident missile launched from submarines. John Wolfstall, an arms control expert who worked for President Obama, has read read the plan and is alarmed.
I think the document really goes off the rails by calling for the development of not one but two new types of nuclear weapons that would be deployed both on submarines and on surface ships. It talks about wanting to increase the role of nuclear weapons, that the United States might use them not in fewer situations but in more situations.
The idea is to make Russia think twice about using new land-based cruise missiles in Eastern Europe. The U.S. has accused Russia of violating the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Matthew Kronig is the author of the upcoming book, The Logic of American Nuclear Strategy. He says Russia is forcing the U.S.'s hand.
Their plan is to use a number of small nuclear weapons early in the conflict to try to frighten us into backing down. And right now we don't have a good response to that.
This is the first nuclear posture review in 8 years. Past administrations all agree the nuclear triad needs to be modernized. What has experts concerned is that developing new tactical nukes is an expensive way to bargain with the Russians. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. President Trump is suggesting in an interview that he has developed a positive relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but he declined to tell the Wall Street Journal whether the two have spoken. The president calls his relationship with Kim, quote, very good. The remarks come after North and South Korea held their first talks in 2 years, and the North agreed to participate in the Winter Olympics in South Korea next month. Up next, the House passes a new FISA extension. The Senate's up next. We'll ask the panel whether that is good or bad for most Americans. Plus, what did the president say in that Oval Office meeting? All of that. First, beyond our borders tonight, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is expressing confidence her Conservative Party can find common ground with center-left Social Democrats in Germany and establish formal coalition talks. If Merkel is unable to establish a ruling group, she would have to preside over a minority-led government or call for new elections. 8 earthquakes with magnitudes of at least 4 rocked the Iran border with Iraq today. State television reports 4 people suffered minor injuries there. The quakes occurred in the same area where a magnitude 7.2 quake killed more than 530 people in November. Ecuador has granted citizenship to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. He's been living in asylum at the nation's embassy in London for more than 5 years. Great Britain has rejected Ecuador's request to grant Assange diplomatic status. Assange originally sought refuge to avoid extradition to Sweden for sex-related charges. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
On this vote, the yeas are 256, the nays are 164. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The president fully supports the 702 and was happy to see that it passed the House today, but he does have some overall concern with the FISA program more generally. The president doesn't feel that we should have to choose between protecting American citizens and protecting their civil liberties. He wants to do both.
It's one thing to spy on foreigners in foreign lands, and that's what the FISA Act is supposed to do. We actually will reauthorize it. That's part of our reform. We reauthorize spying on foreigners in foreign lands. But millions of Americans are accidentally or incidentally collected in this database, and we don't want people willy-nilly just looking into this database without a warrant.
Well, the FISA extension of 702, the amended FISA, passed the House today. The vote was 256 to 164. Now heads to the Senate. One of the people possibly standing in the way there is Senator Paul. We'll see how that develops, but it has to be passed by the end of next week. What about this? It was an interesting day on this issue and others. We'll start there. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent, National Public Radio, and Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. Judge, I'll start with you because you started this morning on Fox and Friends, and you said this about all of this.
I'm scratching my head. I don't understand why Donald Trump is in favor of this. His woes began with unlawful foreign surveillance and unconstitutional domestic surveillance of him before he was the president of the United States. And now he wants to institutionalize this. Mr. President, this is not the way to go. Spying is valid to find the foreign agents among us, but it's got to be based on suspicion and not an area code.
A short time later, on Twitter, the president tweeted, House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of discredited and phony dossier to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others. Short time later, about an hour and a half. With that being said, I have personally directed the fix to the unmasking process since taking office, and today's vote is about foreign surveillance of foreign bad guys on foreign land. We need it. Get smart. He obviously was watching.
He obviously was watching. It's flattering to know that he was watching. He's stated many times that he watches that show, and I'm a regular on it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've also been railing against the FISA law since it was first enacted because it permits federal agents to spy on Americans. This one is the worst of all because it permits the FBI to have access to the database and to use it in criminal prosecutions. That's an end run around the Fourth Amendment. When the British government did this to the colonists, we took up arms against them. This is the most serious violation of the civil liberties of law-abiding, innocent Americans since the Alien and Sedition Acts punished speech.
702, there were some inaccuracies in his tweets. The 702 deals with the emails and what they're getting from Google and AT&T and that sort of thing, and they can look at it if an American is involved in going after a foreign suspect.
Yes. 702 is one of many authorities. There are many, many authorities available to the NSA to engage in domestic surveillance. This is just one of them. But the most pernicious part is what I just mentioned, because for the first time, the FBI can now lawfully go in there and pull criminal evidence from the intelligence surveillance.
The politics of this, however, first of all, the intel community will tell you that this is crucial for them, they say. Two, the administration has been pushing for the reauthorization for months. And then this tweet sent people's hair on fire this morning.
Look, to quote the president, that being said, the White House position is to support what was on the floor today and what the president was tweeting against. And it took a couple hours and apparently a phone call from Paul Ryan to kind of get the president back in lane to where he's saying, I'm fine with this surveilling foreign people.
I think somebody in the White House.
Yes, somebody in the White House also intervened.
Well.
And, you know, I want to reform the unmasking process.
Okay, on the substance of this, I want to turn to a voice we haven't heard in a while, and that is Charles Krauthammer. We've talked about this many times.
The Constitution is not a treaty with the rest of the world. It's an instrument of protection of the United States. Countries spy on each other. We spy on others. I'm glad that we do. So in principle, can you abuse that? Yes. But then you have to talk about the mechanism of protecting against abuse, and that, I think, is a good debate. But to say, well, in principle, it can be abused, so we shouldn't have it, makes no sense at all. Look, everybody complained after 9/11 who was not collecting the dots. This is a collection of dots. And if you want it held by the telecoms instead of the government as a compromise, okay, I don't have a great objection to that. But this is not a police state tactic.
Charles, by the way, is still on the mend, and we hope he comes back soon. But, Matt, that's the argument that the intel community makes as well.
I feel unworthy to sit in this chair. I'm glad you played the clip. Yeah, I think that's right. I think what Americans are searching for is a balance. They don't want to let the bad guys free because the bad guys say we're going to use our system, our open system, our constitutional system with freedoms against us to undermine us. And I really don't see what's wrong with finding these guys overseas. I do like the idea of adding steps that when Americans, when citizens are caught up in the process of this surveillance, that you have to go to a court and you have to come up with a reason that you need to look at it. But it would be a big mistake for this country to not give the intel community the tools they need, despite the fact that Donald Trump has been greatly misserved by some people in this community. It would be a big mistake for us to not give them the tools to stop terrorism, because we will have dead Americans if we don't.
This debate's going to continue, and obviously we'll follow it in the Senate. I want to turn to the other big story here today, and this is the negotiation on the DACA deal. Take a listen.
We're counting on Republicans and Democrats to come together, which we think they will, to make a deal on DACA and on border security.
We have an agreement that we're, the bipartisan group I'm talking about, the six of us working, that we're shopping among our colleagues now. We don't want to release details until we talk to more of our colleagues.
There is no deal. I want to shop around my colleagues and see what their appetite is. There's got to be one because we're running out of time. So our group, our working group, came up with a bipartisan proposal in principle.
Okay, so there was this meeting about this at the Oval Office today, bipartisan senators, House members, in which it got fiery, talking about other countries sending people to the U.S. The president, and we've confirmed this from various sources, said, quote, "Why are we having all these people from S-hole countries come here?" The White House responded, saying certain Washington politicians choose to fight for foreign countries, but President Trump will always fight for the American people. The president will only accept an immigration deal that adequately addresses the visa lottery system and chain migration, two programs that hurt our economy and allow terrorists into our country. Like other nations that have merit-based immigration, President Trump is fighting for permanent solutions that make our country stronger by welcoming those who can contribute to our society, grow our economy, and assimilate into our great nation. Mara, the eyebrow raising on Capitol Hill was quite something.
Well, first of all, there's several things that are really astounding here. Don't forget, this was the week where he held an extraordinary meeting on Tuesday. Bipartisan, said pretty much, I'll sign what you send me. I'm not going to hold out for everything I want, but I do need the wall. Okay. He did two things. First of all, he rejected the nascent deal, whatever you want to call it, the principles of the deal that a bipartisan group.
Well, he said go back at it.
Yes, it's not ready. Yes, he didn't accept
we need
their
four
outline.
things.
We need four things. And even though they had told reporters that the four things were in there, they weren't in there enough for the president. So he rejected, or he asked them to work more on it. That's the first thing. And don't forget, we're getting to the first deadline next week. And the second thing he did is use some pretty astounding language where it was reported he not only said, why are we having all these people from S-hole countries coming here? Why can't we have more people from Norway?
I've known him for 30 years. I know him well, and I like him and admire him. But this is a new low. The language, the racial implications are reprehensible, and he deserves the criticism he's going to get. Flip side of this is, a lot of his supporters will agree with that tone and elected him because he uses from time to time that tone, and will cheer him on.
Basically, the president is frustrated because this was not the group that he said should negotiate it. He said he would sign something if it went through the process. And he is frustrated that they're going back to this decision on the El Salvadoran folks who are here temporarily. And they're now chiseling away at that. He wants to talk about the three things he wants to get done. And I think that's why he got fiery and perhaps intemperate for sure.
And obviously was not meaning, I suppose, to put those particular words out. They came from people inside the meeting. But he should expect that is going to happen.
He had Democrat members and staffers in the meeting, and someone called the media. I think the president learned a big lesson today. When those folks are in